He brought Theory U to life, where it is about pre-sensing, where it is letting go of the ego, focusing on the eco. And of course, the question that is at least coming to my mind when I think of Otto Scharmer is, how is that possible in a remote era to really connect with the ecosystem, connect with the others, when I'm sitting by myself months in an end, isolated, and might experience those loneliness that Mr. Rosa referenced, and where I get strived of all these visceral experiences that usually connect me to the world, as Mr. Rosa put it, like the background noise, the shuffling of feet, the community. So I'm quite curious to hear Mr. Scharmer's take on that. For those of you who do not know Mr. Scharmer, he's a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management. As I mentioned, he is also the founder of Theory U. He's the co-founder of the Pre-Sensing Institute. He's involved in numerous projects all around the world. A list so long, I cannot go through it, because we really want to hear what he has to say by himself. So glad to have you with us today, and I'll pass on the screen to you. Welcome, Otto Scharmer.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and yeah, it's a honor and privilege to me to join the conversation. I much enjoyed the talk by Hartmut Rosa. And I think I can connect in many ways to that. And I'm going to share a few images, and I want to focus a little bit on the relationship between the evolution of the university and actually what's happening around us, kind of the disruption that we live through in this historical moment that we are part of, the environmental, the social, but also the mental health disruptions that are coming our way. And so what you see here is an image that is capturing actually this moment, right? This we are in, which is, you can think of disruption in very simple terms, of course, which is the future is going to be different from what we know today. So if we picture ourselves today here, then we know a lot about that. And if you picture kind of the future over here on the other side of the abyss, we know less about that. But what we know least about is how to move from here to there, from one side to the other. And that really has been the organizing question for me. And I think the University of the Future is actually needs to address that challenge, because disruptions will come our way, and how to connect with emerging future possibilities that will be very different to what we have known in the past is a core function that we need. It's a core capability that we need to foster in us as individuals, but also kind of on an organizational and institutional level. And the perspective that I'm taking on that question, and I'm an action researcher here at MIT, I have been investigating that question for the past 20 plus years. And what I came, the answer that I have been finding throughout these years is that what it takes is a journey that in part is an outer journey, right? Kind of you could say the innovator's outer journey, going to the edges of the system, seeing where the new is showing up already now, but it also is an inner journey, right? An inner journey to accessing the deeper levels of resonance, to speak with Hartmut Rosa, in knowing that actually can guide us into this unknown territory. And that's what I'm going to talk about. You have seen this, and that's kind of a little bit kind of my methodological background many times, kind of systems thinking depicted as an iceberg model. We have seen, disruptions show up in all the environmental issues, the ecological divide, all the, society, the social issues. I mean, here in the US, it's basically a society falling apart, right? So we see polarization, and then, of course, this is kind of all about the mental health issues. 1 in 4 college students in the USA contemplate thoughts of suicide. 1 out of 4. So that's just another data point on what Hartmut Rosa was talking about. So these are the issues. And in many ways, if you look at the bigger picture, what you can say is we collectively create results that almost nobody wants, right? Destruction of our planet, kind of destruction of our societies, destruction of our kind of capacities to connect with our true creativity, with our true selves. And so if those are the symptoms, what does systems thinking do? Systems thinking is inviting us to unpack this situation from the deeper layers of the iceberg that are below the waterline. And I would say the evolution of systems thinking is captured right with these three words here, from structures to paradigms of thought, and from paradigms of thought to the deeper sources that we are operating from. And that's a little bit kind of the journey I want to invite you into, and then apply that to universities. So to summarize, this approach that I refer to as awareness-based systems change in 4 lines. You cannot understand a system unless you change it. Famously, Kurt Lewin, who came out of Berlin, right, Berlin Universität, here to MIT and to other East Coast in the 1930s, right after Hitler took power. He's the founder of action research, and that's one of his founding principles, right? You have to participate in the world. If you want to really learn the relevant stuff today, you have to participate. And I think it has an eminent implication for learning today. That learning, I think, has to be embedded in the hotspots of societal regeneration that are happening around us right now, and that if we are disconnected from them, puts us into a space that often is not regenerative. So that's his famous principle. You cannot change the system unless you transform consciousness. That is my past 20 years as an action researcher summarized in less than 10 words. And it basically says, you need to address all 4 of these levels. If you address systems change today, it's not enough to react against the symptoms. What you really need to understand is to understand and address these deeper root issues at play. If that's so, you have to transform the mindsets of the people that are enacting these systems. If that's true, then the real question, of course, is how. And here's what I learned on that one. You can't transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. Unless you look into the mirror, right? Yes, we know that from the interpersonal realm already, but we often lack the infrastructures that facilitate these processes on an institutional or even on a societal or whole systems level. And lastly, you can't transform systems unless you sense and actualize the future that is wanting to emerge. So if you double click on the English word leadership, it goes back to an Indo-European word root, lithe. And that literally means to step forth, to move from one territory that we know very well, let's say current reality, to another territory, the emerging future, that we don't know, and that is only beginning to come into being if we have the courage to step into the territory of the unknown. And I think nurturing that capacity is one of the eminent critical capacities that we need to build, that we need to be in support of, and that often in conventional learning environments are missing. So how? The real question, of course, is how, right? So let me share 1 or 2 learnings with you. So in working with many change makers and innovators and studying them, here is how one of them, the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, Bill O'Brien, summarized his own experience. He said, the success of an intervention, the success of what I do as a change maker, depends on the interior condition of the intervener. The success of what I do as a change maker depends on the inner place, from that I operate. And that inner place today I would summarize with these three terms: open mind, open heart, and open will, aka our capacity to access courage, compassion, and curiosity. And what it does is it moves us beyond downloading. It moves us beyond same old, right? Kind of reenacting habitualized patterns of the past, patterns of thought and patterns of conversation or action. And what I really mean with open mind is the capacity to suspend old habits of judgment and to see with fresh eyes. What I mean with open heart is the capacity to empathize and to look at a problem through the eyes of another. That's what I mean with sensing. And what I mean with open will is the capacity of letting go and letting come, letting go of the old and letting come of the new. I think that is the deeper vocabulary of real change today and of real leadership. But when you look around, what do we actually see? We see pretty much the opposite of everything I just talked about, which is a freeze reaction of the mind, of the heart, and of the will. In other words, rather than seeing, right, we see patterns of denial. Think about the whole denial industry, which is so well funded. Rather than sensing, we see patterns of desensing. Think about the whole Facebook social media problem, right? Which is where, you know, half of all the depressions are coming from, right? The digital echo chambers we are in. Think about, you know, instead of letting go and presencing, by which I mean connecting to your highest future possibility, we see patterns of holding on to the past and absencing, disconnecting to that future possibility. Instead of this part of the cycle, which is really crystallizing, prototyping, co-creating, it's really about bringing the new into reality. What we see instead is patterns, collective patterns of the opposite of that, which is blaming, destruction, and eventually self-destruction. And I think today that's, as human beings, kind of we are collectively enacting both of these patterns, kind of we are in between. So we are in a space where whenever we face a challenge of disruption, and that tends to be increasingly the case, right? Disruptions are coming our way. That's, you know, that's the only thing we know pretty much. Whenever we face a challenge of disruption, we have a choice. We can turn away or we can turn toward. We can respond by turning away and activating this kind of process that by now we only know too well, right, from all sorts of collective patterns. Or we can turn toward and open up and activate this kind of process pattern that we also are pretty familiar with. But the trick is really kind of becoming aware of that choice and increasing our capability in challenges that are high stakes to strengthen these capacities here. And in many ways, the challenge is, yes, we need to strengthen these capacities, but we also need to learn how to engage these patterns that are so much amplified over the past 5, 6, 7 years. And the real question, I think, that should be, you know, at the foundation really of the new university is this: how can we transform and regenerate our old systems that are designed in a way that are deepening the three divides, the ecological, the social, and the inner divide? So how can we design processes and interactions that are focusing on transforming and regenerating these patterns? And I believe this has to do with 3 blind spots that have to do with 3 separations. Not seeing, right? So this whole pattern of denial and disinformation, which really is a disconnect between self and wall. If there's a wall between me and my own experience, what's actually going on outside. It has, secondly, to do with a blind spot that deals with seeing something but not feeling it, right? Not feeling the resonance, Rosa would say. So that's a disconnect between self and other, right? I see something as a thing, but not as a being that can speak to me, kind of that I can attend to on a deeper level. I don't feel the resonance. And the third issue is to seeing something, feeling something, but not acting, right? That's the issue of depression, of doubt, of apathy, and of fear. And it's a disconnect between me, who I am today, and my own agency, my own ability to make things happen, my highest future potential. So if we want to address these blind spots, which I think should be the core curriculum of the University of the Future, we need deepening the scientific activity. And what is the essence of all scientific activity? It's about let the data talk to you, right? It's not projecting your own thing. And on an individual, personal level, it starts with this question: can you listen with humility, right? How good are you to listen to things that you don't want to hear? That's kind of the discipline we want to foster. Secondly, right, so this piece here, kind of the Facebook issue, which is really the issue of architectures of disconnection, of separation, has to do with deepening democracy, right? And creating architectures of connection. And on a personal level, the capacity that we need to nurture in our learners and in ourselves is really, can you sense the system from the edges? Can you feel the resonance, right, in a social field? How good are you to sense the situation from the viewpoint of those that are most marginalized in the way the current system is organized? That's the capacity we need to nurture. And number three, kind of not acting side of things, the third blind spot, we need to deepen our capacity to access into our individual and collective creativity. Specifically, we need to nurture action confidence, activate action confidence. And the question, the skill and capacity we need to nurture here is, can you sense the future as it emerges? So what I mean with future is not some abstract thing that happens to others. What I mean with future is a future possibility that depends on you in order to come to reality. That's the core of the entrepreneurial process. That's the core of the creative process. And that's the core of what we need to nurture in students and in learners, in order to help them to activate their true potential, rather than having everything focused on the head and very little capacity to activate that. So if you now look at the bigger picture and say, okay, so that's kind of on the personal level, but what about the societal, right? I think society-wise, we need innovations and infrastructures, of course, for economic transformation, which has to do with transforming our economies from ecosystem awareness to ecosystem awareness to well-being for all. It has to do with new democratic infrastructures, but most importantly, it has to do with the new learning infrastructures. And here I think the focus is on whole person, whole systems learning. And here's what I mean with that. I think when you look at the whole learning space today, two main things are going on: deepening and broadening. And what I mean with deepening is moving from old ways of learning that are really head-centric, right? It's just kind of focusing on the head, to learning by doing, which is head and hand, to transformational learning infrastructures that engage all three, head, heart, and hand. And then on the broadening side, we have, who is the learner, right? The individual, is it the team, is it a whole organization, or is it the whole system, the whole ecosystem? Now, when you look at this matrix and ask yourself, okay, as a society, where do we put all the dollars, all the euros, right? And where is the overall focus today? And the answer is, of course, when you look at this thing, it's very clear, right? The focus is here. right? That's traditional learning, right? Most of the resources go there. It is individual, right? So we train individuals, and it is mostly kind of head-centric. Yes, we have learning by doing, kind of we have some reflective learning environments, and we have some team things going on, and that's what we build into our curricula. But most of the resources are here, and when you look at all the major challenges of the future that we are facing, what are they calling us to do? They are calling us to create transformational learning infrastructures on all levels, particularly here on an ecosystem level. That's pretty much the blind spot right now. And I think that's what the university of the future should be really focusing on. Transformational learning, and learning that really builds in this deeper process of connecting with resonance that Rosa talks about. What does that really mean? It means we move from an old mindset of looking at the world and of systems thinking that has the observer here on one side of the telescope and the observed system here on the other side of the telescope, to a new mindset where I bend the beam of observation back onto the observing self. And that reflective turn, right, it's called mindfulness, it's called reflection, and in a conversation, it's called a move from debate to dialogue. I think that's what we need to cultivate in our classrooms, that's what we need to cultivate in our schools. There are many, what I also learned is that just giving people, you need for that new tools, right, that's one thing. But what we also learn is tools is not enough. You need practice fields. And what we learned is that these deeper new social skills need embodied learning practices where we bring in the humanities, right, which are in crisis, as we all know, in a totally new way, right? So where we bring in social arts inspired practices that allow learners and students and leaders, right, in institutions to engage with one another in a new way. I'm not going into detail here. This is an embodied learning practice kind of that is mapping the current situation and emerging future pathways, and is really helping within a 2 or 3 hour format to make a system sense and see itself, what I mentioned earlier. And we apply that also in many institutional settings, kind of with senior leaders and leaders kind of from all levels of the organizations. And in ULab, I also showed that you can use digital technologies in ways that promote these deep learning spaces. So in ULab via edX, we have had more than 250,000 registered participants that formed kind of countless, I mean, we know of 2000s, there are probably many more hubs, place-based communities where they come together and where they organize kind of in small groups to apply these practices and to engage kind of in these deeper learning experiences with each other, because all those deeper social skills, right, you don't learn by listening to a lecture. You learn by doing. You learn by engaging in these types of practice fields. So let me just close with one way of summarizing systems thinking, how it could be applied. And that's kind of the way of what you have here, right? A smartphone. What can we do with a smartphone? Two things. We can load a new app that gives us a new skill. That's like horizontal learning, right? Or we can upgrade the operating system. And upgrading the operating system is really what's related to vertical learning. And that's what I mean with systems thinking. So when I look at the evolution of universities and at the evolution of learning systems, here's what I see. I see an evolution of operating systems from 1.0, input and authority-centric, to 2.0, output and efficiency-centric, 3.0, outcome and user-centric, 4.0, regenerative and ecosystem-centric. So if you look at health and learning, kind of right now, kind of, the main focus is here, right? Evidence-based medicine, testing-driven teaching. which of course is not real learning. The good school is this, learner-centric or student-centric, and a good healthcare delivery system is patient-centric, right? We reorganize healthcare delivery around patient journeys, patient pathways, but the future is not there. I think the future has to do with moving towards strengthening the sources of well-being, right? Something that Rosa was touching on a little bit, and moving towards traditional learning formats to learning formats that are whole person, whole system, the way I described it before. Now, farm and food it's from industrial agriculture to organic, less negative footprint, to regenerative, food as medium for healing planet and people. Finance, you could make the same thing, but let me jump to development, which is the way we measure development, conventionally GDP, but since 1990 we have the HDI, complementing GDP with really metrics around health and education performance. So Human Development Index as human well-being, but since last December we really have this on a global level, human and planetary well-being as a new paradigm that is much more in sync, I think, with the needs of this century in order to measure development and economic progress. So coming to universities, I think kind of traditional 1.0, what's that? That's purely online one-to-many, right? The devastating impact of that Hartmut Rosa was referring to, you can say kind of that kind of old style online, right? One-to-many structures, are like without kind of closing that feedback loop. But then of course kind of a real, so all kind of slightly advanced learning systems are testing driven. You kind of build in activities and so on, kind of little exercises. But in reality, kind of the good university, the good school is that we all have in many places also is something related to 3.0, student-centric, small groups, teams, kind of you have like a lot of group work, and I think that has a lot of positive things that we're referenced and can be blended, of course, with online environments. It's not an either or. We anyway talk about blended environments. But I think where we are going is something like this. Where we need to go in this century is something like this, 4.0. That you can think about. The 4.0 university, in my view, is something that you can think about as an ecosystem. And that's what I see here at MIT, right? Ecosystem means there's a breathing in and a breathing out, right? And the breathing in is internalizing the problems of the world into the core curriculum of the world. And then the breathing out is participate, right? Put the students, the learner, into the driver's seat of change and make them participate in the hotspots of societal regeneration, right? Of our economies, of our profound transformation processes that take place across all industries, across all sectors, across all systems over the next decade or two. So in closing, if that's what we need to do in this century, particularly in this decade of transformation that we are now beginning, planetary healing and civilizational renewal or regeneration, I believe all these things, like the climate agreement or the SDGs, can only be activated if we give access to methods and tools for that. If we develop the capacity to activate generative social fields, by which I mean to turn toxic or just transactional stakeholder relationships to co-creative relationships, right? How to activate generative social fields and, among all these different stakeholders here, that's really the core skill that, that we need in this century. And the only way to do that, that's what I learned over the past 20 years, is to have a support structure. No one can do that without a support structure. And that's something I call School for Transformation, which should be embedded in every single university today. And for me, a School for Transformation is infrastructure that is democratizing the access to transformation literacy. It's democratizing the access to the methods and tools for transformation by integrating science, arts, consciousness, technology, and profound societal renewal.
Thank you so much, Otto. It's really been splendid. The first time I got in touch with the Theory U, I think, is 10 years ago, and it just still feels so fresh and relevant, and really love what you said. It's like going from the user-centric, because that's where we are in most discussions here also in the festival. So usually we have to be more student-centric, and I really love that you bring in one step more, and that is being ecosystem-centric. We unfortunately only have like 2 very quick minutes for Q&A, so I'm going to step into one question here, and that is coming from Claudia Brötzel, who asks, the problem is the whole performance evaluation and thus the preservation of the power position, the institution of higher education. How can we get out of the performance trap? What could be a first step here?
Well, how can we get out of the performance trap? I think it's improving the metrics, right, towards level 4, right, the 4.0. I think that would be one approach. And then also, you know, and there are like interesting examples under this way. So the question is, how can we research and make visible whether a university is actually operating as a generative social field? Those are qualities of connection, qualities of relationship. I think it is researchable, and that's exactly what we need to discern and kind of develop instruments for to make that visible. A good school, a good university is a generative social field. And that's something that can be documented. It's something, this whole relational dimension is what we also need to make visible the deeper changes in social systems. So I think we need to upgrade our evaluation tools. That's one of the key leverage points.
You just said, maybe to close this for the last minute, that it's necessary to build support structures, because Miriam earlier asked, is that something that I go through on my own as an individual, or do you foresee helpers in your system? Do you see it more as a collective approach, this journey, even if it is an individual inner journey?
It is both individual and it's collective, and what you learn from really that 50+ years from change management is that no one can do that alone. Support structure means you are together, you have quality spaces together with others who are on the same journey, kind of, and who can help each other to move forward. A lot of that is peer-based. And I think what's holding us back today a lot is fear, right? Fear moving into, and doubt, right, into our own capacities. And the way to address that is these support structures. It's often small groups, you need practices, but it's support we can give to each other. And a campus should be a place where you experience the presence of such a support structure, where the quality of relationships are of the kind that you get inspired, that you see other people stepping into their full agency and get inspired to do so and are supported in that way. And I think that's really what's missing, not only in universities, but it's also really missing in, it's a key ingredient for the transformation process that we need to go through as a society when you look at the bigger challenges. And universities could play a key role there. It could also be that universities are immune to that and become less and less relevant for the future, because we need these support spaces one way or another, inside or outside of universities.
As you said in your own model, there's the you way or there's the other way. Let's hope most universities start building those support structures and start following the pre-sensing way. There's been a lot more comments in the chat. Unfortunately, we do not have time to answer them all. There also was a very critical question to the end, but I just recommend to follow the links that Antares posted, and I hope that all the material available online will answer more of the questions that we have to leave open now. Thanks so much for joining us today, Otto.
Thank you so much, and wish you lots of success for the remainder of the conference.
Yes.